Breeze to Terabithia, and chapter 11. Jess' father fills in the rest of the information for him. Leslie had tried to swing into Terabithia and the rope broke. She hit her head on something when she fell, which explains why the fact that she could swim did not help her. Jess denies it, all point blank, accusing his father of lying to him. In particular, he wants to assure Mabel that it is a lie, for he sees her looking terrified and knows that she is remembering that Leslie was not a Christian and is therefore, to her understanding, going to hell. He shouts at Mabel that it is a lie and then runs out of the house. Um, keep Leslie from seeing dead. His dad takes the pickup after him and picks him up and carries him in. This seems to make something snap within Jess, and he allows himself to go numb. When they reach home, he quietly goes inside and lies down on his bed. He wakes up in the middle of the night, not too sure what has happened. He knows in some part of his mind that Leslie is dead, but he refuses to accept it. Leslie could not die any more than he himself could die. Instead, he lies awake, planning his next escape to Terabithia with Leslie. He structures the whole conversations, apologizing for not inviting her to come to Washington with him and Miss Edmonds, describing the buffalo hunt. It occurs to him to tell her that he was scared to go to Terabithia that morning, but that it's too close uh, to home, but that hits too close to home and he decides to stop thinking about it. He will tell Leslie when he sees her the next day. He creates his day with Miss Edmund in his mind instead, dredging up every detail, keeping the terrible memories at bay. Eventually, he falls asleep. When he wakes up, his first thought is that he has forgotten the milking. But when he gets to the kitchen, he discovers that his father has done it. His mother is strangely gentle toward him, and she has made him pancakes. Just absorbs himself in eating his pancakes, thinking only how good they are. Eventually, Brenda starts to heckle him for eating so calmly, saying, if Jimmy Dix died, I would not be able to eat a bite. Their mother tells her to keep her mouth shut, but she persists. All the time, Jessie is simply tucking away pancakes, not understanding much of what is going on around him. His father comes in and tries to talk to him, to tell him that he is going over to the Bergs to pay his respects and that Jess ought to come too, since he knew the little girl best. Jess asks, what little girl? Dully confused, and his father tries to explain to him again that Leslie is dead, as if sleepwalking just goes to put his jacket on and they leave for the birds. Chapter 12, Stranded. Summary. Jess and his parents walk over to the Bergs. When they get there, they find the golden room filled with people, all the people crying, unnerved Jess. Somewhere between his house and the Bergs, he seems to have gained some sort of an understanding of what happened, but he is only able to examine his thoughts with a clinical detachment, thinking of the practical ways Leslie's death will affect him. The kids at school will be respectful of him. His parents will make his sisters be nice to him. He has reached the second stage in his grieving, but he has barely begun yet. All this breaks when Bill, Leslie's father, comes over to him. He hugs Jess and thanks him repeatedly for being such a wonderful friend to Leslie. Jess retreats from this initially by imagining how he and Leslie would react if they were watching such a melodramatic scene on TV. But his link with that dramatic snaps when detachment snaps when Bill tells him that they have decided to have Leslie cremated. One of just a few acknowledgments of Leslie's death had been contained in a passing thought that he would like to see her one more time, even laid out. Now that he knows he will not see her again, he cannot maintain his sense of apathy any longer and he runs out of the house. Jeff's emotions have turned on again with a revenge when he tears back into his house. Mabel wants to know if he had seen Leslie laid out. Mabel wants to know what a dead person looks like, but Jess just hits her hard. He gathers up the paint set that Leslie gave him for Christmas, runs back to the creek, and throws it in. Jess' father approaches and tells him that was a damn fool thing to do. Jess is sobbing and screaming to tell, so his father gathers him into his lap, stroking his hair and comforting him. Eventually, Jess calms down enough to ask his father whether he thinks that God damns non Christians to hell. His father is surprised by the question and replies that Jess has no need to worry about Leslie, that God would not send a little girl to hell. Jess is soothed. When they go back into the house, Jess is closer to him feeling like himself than he has been all day. He is still in the throes of grief, is incredibly tired and cannot seem to focus on the outside world. He is thinking more normally and he is aware of the situation now. Later on, Bill comes by and asks Des to take care of Prince Terrain while he and his wife go on a trip to Pennsylvania. Jess agrees and sleeps with Prince Terrain that night, and he is comforted by the warm body of the dog Leslie had loved. Chapter 13, Building the Bridge. The next morning, Jess heads down onto the creek. He means to see if he can find any of his paints, but once he is there, he decides to go to Terabithia instead. He crosses on an old branch and then hesitates, unsure of what to do. For a minute, he is convinced that the magic has indeed departed forever, and that Leslie's death and the breaking of the rope cemented his fate as an ordinary boy rather than a king for the rest of his life. He was always felt somewhat at a loss without Leslie to guide him through the wonders of the kingdom. She is always she's always been the one who spoke so loyally, who had most of the ideas, who really had a sense of how a magic kingdom should be. Jess wants to recapture that, but he is not sure how. Eventually, he decides to make a funeral read. Jess is pleased with the effect when he has done. He picks it up and slowly, at the head of a great procession, carries it into the grove of the spirits. Here he manages to find birds, lift from his few experiences at church. Father, into thy hands I commend her spirit. Though words have the ring of the sacred grove in them, and just begins to feel that perhaps he can be a king even now that his queen is gone. Just then he hears a shriek. Mabel has tried to cross the other side of the creek on the branch, but she has gotten stuck halfway and is too terrified to move. Jess is still in control, and the sense of strength and descended upon him in the sacred grove has not left him. He rescues her, coaxing her across the other side. Mabel confesses that she had wanted to help him so he would not be lonely, but that she got too scared. Jess assures her that everyone gets scared and it is nothing to be ashamed of. They walk back to the house together. The next day in school, Leslie's desk has already been taken out of the classroom. Everything floods back to Jess, this time in a different light. All her schoolmates had hated Leslie, he thinks, and they would not care that she was dead. And they were all too eager to get rid of her desk and the memory of her. Jess is sullen and withdrawn until Mrs. Mears calls him outside the room to speak with him. She expresses her sympathy, saying how extraordinary Leslie was and how much she will miss her. Mrs. Mears said that since she will miss her, she cannot imagine how much harder it must be for Jess. She tells him that when her husband died, people were always telling her she would forget, but that she did not want to forget. She knows it is the same for Jess now, and she wants him to know that if she can ever help him through this in any way, he should let her know. Mrs. Mayer's words actually have meaning for Jess and help him to see Mrs. Mears in a whole new light. He appreciates knowing that he will never forget Leslie. He thinks about how Leslie has changed him, and he realizes that the only way to preserve both those changes and her memory is to preserve Terabithia. He knows that Terabithia is not the ultimate destination in his life. Terabithia is a place of childhood, and that he must graduate from there to the real world. He is resolved not to let Terabithia die when he leaves it for his new world pressing on him. The Bucks move out of the old Perkins place several days later, saying that without Leslie, there is no reason to stay there anymore. They give Jess all Leslie's books and her own watercolor set and tell him that if he wants anything they have left behind, all he has to do is ask. Jess requests some of the lumber on her back porch. On their and lumber on their back porch. The next day, Jess goes down to the creek and builds a bridge across it with the lumber he got from the birds. He brings Mabel down and swears her to secrecy, although he says she might want to let Joyce and in on the secret in time. They cross the bridge to Terabithia, and he tells Mabel the Terabithians are all in a flutter, saying there is a rumor going around that the beautiful girl arriving today might be the queen they've been waiting for. And perhaps that was the end of this whole story. And I can't find the next chapter, so this must be the concluding chapter of this Bristol Terabithia. Very pathetic story indeed.